The nightclub was filled with familiar sounds of evening chatter, laughter, and the clinking of glasses. Connor sat at one of the tables with his friends and his wife. His wife, Siobhan, was sitting next to him, discussing the latest news with Mary, the wife of their friend Patrick, and with Scott, who had also come with his wife. It was a typical Friday night, a time for adults to unwind after a long week. The atmosphere at the table was peaceful and warm. Friends chatted, laughed, and discussed their plans. Connor glanced at his wife, noticing her genuine smile. It was an almost perfect moment, a familiar routine, but filled with warmth and closeness. But something began to catch his attention. In the corner of the nightclub, two men were sitting. One was calm, quietly observing everything around him, sipping his drink without engaging. But the other man kept getting up and walking around the room. Connor noticed him approaching tables where women were sitting, offering something to them. Sometimes he left quickly, and other times he lingered, pulling documents or photos from his pocket. Connor quietly asked his friends, "Guys, do you see those two men?" Everyone looked in the direction he indicated. Patrick snorted, probably selling something or offering services. Mary shook her head. It looked suspicious. If they were selling something illegal, the club would have kicked them out. The friends exchanged jokes about shady businesses and returned to their conversations. But Connor continued to watch the man who was wandering around the club. Soon, his suspicions were confirmed. The man was heading straight for their table. "Hey guys," the man said with a friendly smile as he stopped at their group. "How's it going?" Everyone at the table responded in unison. "Good." The man leaned slightly, resting his hand on the table. "My friend and I are here for the weekend on business, and he's looking for company tonight. He wanted to know if any of your ladies might be interested in his offer." A silence fell. Connor was shocked, and judging by his friends' faces, they were too. Who was this guy to make such a bold proposal? But before any of the men could respond, Mary spoke up first. "Why should any of us be interested in that?" The man pointed to his friend sitting in the booth. "My friend is a special guy. He's got a big farm and he knows how to use it, if you know what I mean." The women at the table burst into loud laughter, but the man seemed oblivious to their mockery. "So, what do you think, ladies? Want to check for yourselves?" The women exchanged glances, and now Eileen joined in the absurd conversation. "And how do we know if his farm is really that impressive?" Without hesitation, the man pulled out the same envelope he had been carrying around all evening. Connor barely had time to realize what was happening when the stranger was already unfolding photos in front of their table. Everyone froze, seeing the contents. The women gasped loudly with exaggerated surprise, playing along with the man. Connor, Patrick, and Declan sat in awkward silence, not knowing how to react. It was uncomfortable, embarrassing, and humiliating, but they quietly waited for it to end. "So, what do you think?" the stranger asked with a smile. Rolling the photos back into the envelope, the women returned the photos, still joking and laughing. Connor sighed with relief, expecting the absurd moment to finally pass. But then the stranger turned directly to Siobhan. "How about you, sweetheart?" At that moment, Connor was sure Siobhan would put this man in his place. He was mentally prepared for her refusal, but to his astonishment, Siobhan quietly said, "I'll go." For a moment, it felt like the whole world had stopped. Connor looked at his wife, unable to believe what he had just heard. The noise around him was deafening, but he couldn't hear a sound. He tried to grasp what she had just said. "I'll go." Those two words echoed in his mind again and again like an obsessive refrain. Siobhan stood up from the table, and the man immediately approached, offering her his hand. She took it as if it were the most natural thing in the world and headed toward the exit with the stranger. "Siobhan, what are you doing?" Connor blurted out, jumping to his feet and grabbing her arm. But before he could hold her back, a massive hand from the other man grabbed his wrist and squeezed so hard that Connor had to let go. This man was the size of an NFL player, standing nearby like a bouncer. "Sorry, buddy, but I can't let you treat ladies roughly. the bouncer said calmly, tightening his grip on Connor's wrist. She's my wife, Connor objected, trying to free himself, but the bouncer's grip was like iron. I'm just trying to stop her from leaving with these guys, Connor said desperately, feeling anger and fear battling inside him. The bouncer turned to Siobhan. Ma'am, are you leaving of your own free will? He asked calmly. Siobhan looked at Connor, then at the bouncer, and as if nothing had happened, whispered, sorry, and told the bouncer, yes, I'm leaving voluntarily. In that moment, Connor's world collapsed. Connor stood frozen in the middle of the nightclub, his hands still aching from the bouncer's grip, but the physical pain was nothing compared to what he felt inside. His wife, his Siobhan, had just left with two strangers, and it had happened right in front of his eyes, in front of their friends, in front of the whole club. He saw her last glance, an apology, a farewell, but it no longer mattered. The bar had quieted down. Even strangers seemed to notice the unfolding drama. The atmosphere became unnaturally still. Patrick and Declan, also stunned, sat in silence. Their wives Mary and Eileen exchanged glances, not knowing how to help. No one had expected this turn of events. Connor, are you okay? Patrick finally asked, his voice full of concern. Connor looked at his friends. Inside him, a storm of emotions raged. Anger, pain, humiliation. He felt like everyone around him was looking at him with pity. Even those who didn't know his story. He couldn't bear it. No, he growled through clenched teeth, wiping sweat from his face. I can't stay here. Mary raised her hand as if to say something, but Connor was already standing. He pushed his chair back abruptly, grabbed his wallet from the table, and threw some money to pay the bill. Everyone kept watching, but he didn't want to see their looks of sympathy and pity. Connor waited while Eileen tried to stop him, but he silently shook his head and headed for the exit. He had almost reached the exit when a new wave of pain overwhelmed him. His head spun, and he stumbled, leaning against the doorframe and taking deep breaths to regain control. How could this happen? He thought, staring at the floor. How could she just leave like that? Not just leave but abandon him in front of their friends, in front of strangers, as if it were something normal. Connor fumbled in his pocket for his phone. He didn't know exactly what he was going to do, but he held it in his hand, trying to make sense of everything. At that moment, the screen lit up, and he saw Siobhan's name. She was calling. It took him a few seconds to decide whether to answer at all. His heart was pounding so loudly it felt like the entire club could hear it. Where are you? He asked before Siobhan could start the conversation. Connor, sweetheart, I can't talk for long, she said, her voice full of neither accusation nor guilt but of strange determination. I just wanted to say that this doesn't mean anything. It's just one time, and I still love you. Please understand. It's just something I have to do. Her words echoed in his mind. How could she say such a thing? How could she claim it meant nothing? He gripped the phone so tightly his knuckles turned white and replied, Please, just tell me where you are. I can come and get you. Just tell me where you are right now. But Siobhan wasn't listening. It's just one time, Connor, she continued as if she hadn't heard him. It's just sex, and it won't change anything between us. I love you, and after this, I'll only be yours. I hope you can understand and accept it. With those words, the call ended. Connor stood staring at the dark screen of his phone. Anger and despair mixed into unbearable pain. Her last words rang in his head like a knife stabbing his heart. She was asking him to understand, as if her betrayal were something small. But to Connor, it was so much more. It had destroyed everything he believed in. Connor didn't remember how he got home. Everything that happened after that call was a blur. When he opened the door to the place he and Siobhan shared, he paused for a moment, looking around. It was their space, the place where they had built their life together. But now he knew it was no longer his home. It no longer felt like home. Everything seemed strange and cold. He took a deep breath, walking into the bedroom, and opened the closet. He pulled down 3 large suitcases from the top shelf and laid them on the bed. Connor methodically began packing his things. Clothes, documents, personal items. All of it had once been part of his life with Siobhan, but now they were just things. It felt like he was dismantling his life piece by piece. At some point, his hands slowed as he remembered how they had planned their future. They had talked about children, about traveling, about growing old together. But now all of that was gone. Those plans no longer made sense. Everything they had was destroyed in a single moment. Soon, almost all of his things were packed. 2 suitcases were already standing by the door, and he was almost ready to leave when he heard the front door quietly open. Siobhan had returned. "Connor," she said quietly, her voice filled with uncertainty. She slowly walked into the room and stopped in the doorway, seeing him packing his things. What are you doing?" she asked, her voice full of panic. He didn't even look at her, continuing to pack the last of his belongings into the suitcase. "I'm leaving, Siobhan, and I'm filing for divorce," he said calmly. But there was determination in every word. She rushed to him, trying to stop him, but Connor gently pushed her hand away with unexpected coldness. "Please, Connor," she sobbed. "You can't just leave. I made a mistake, but it means nothing. It was just one time and I wasn't in my right mind. But now I'm only yours, and I'll fix everything. Please don't leave. You've already destroyed everything," she said, crying and desperately trying to stop him. But Connor kept packing his things. "You already destroyed everything, Siobhan," he said coldly. "And you can't fix it. You did this knowingly." His voice was full of bitterness. "And everything you're saying now is just excuses. I can't be with you after this." With those words, he zipped up the last suitcase, grabbed it, and without looking back at Siobhan, walked toward the door. Her tears and pleas didn't stop him. At that moment, everything was over. Connor sat behind the wheel of his car, his thoughts swirling in a chaotic storm of pain and bitterness. He drove aimlessly, not knowing where he was going, not knowing where he would live. He saw the suitcases in the rearview mirror on the back seat, realizing that he had nothing left but these hastily packed things. Everything that once mattered, everything that connected him to Siobhan, was in the past. He didn't know where to go. The only thing he felt was the need to get as far away from the place where everything had collapsed as possible. Connor turned on his phone and saw several missed calls from Patrick and Declan. They were worried about him, but he wasn't ready to talk to anyone. He just wanted to disappear for a while to deal with the pain on his own. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification. It was a message from Patrick. He offered Connor a place to stay with him and Mary until Connor figured out what to do next. Connor didn't reply immediately, but the idea didn't seem so bad. His house felt empty and meaningless, and he couldn't imagine returning there after everything that had happened. After a while, he finally responded to Patrick, "Can I come over? I'm already on my way." The reply came quickly, "Of course, come on over. We're ready for you." Connor took a deep breath and steered the car toward his friend's house. 20 minutes later, he stood at the doorstep. Patrick opened the door and met him with a warm, understanding look. There were no questions, no judgment, just support. "We knew you'd come," Patrick said softly, stepping aside. Mary hugged him and said, "We're here for you, Connor. You don't need to explain anything. Just stay with us until you're ready to move forward." The guest room was small but cozy. Connor placed his suitcases next to the bed and sat on the edge, feeling completely empty. Mary and Patrick left him alone. He couldn't sleep, just lay there staring at the ceiling, consumed by thoughts of how quickly his life had fallen apart. All the dreams they had with Siobhan, all their plans and hopes, had disappeared in a moment. With this painful awareness, he realized for the first time that his life would never be the same. Though he still didn't know how to move on, he understood that he would have to learn to live in a new reality. A month had passed since Connor moved in with Patrick and Mary. Every day felt like a new challenge. Patrick tried to distract him, inviting him to games or walks, but thoughts of Siobhan wouldn't let go. Sometimes she called him, leaving voice messages full of apologies and pleas, but he never answered. He knew that talking would lead nowhere, and it was too painful to hear her voice. Work became his only refuge. Connor spent long hours at the office, trying to focus on routine tasks. His colleagues noticed the changes, but no one dared to ask questions. His emotional state was obvious to everyone. One evening, after an especially long day at work, Connor decided to return to the nightclub where it all began. It was a strange decision, but he felt the need to go back there, as if it could help him close this painful chapter. When he walked into the nightclub, memories flooded him. In the same corner where Finn and Ronan sat, everything looked just as it had that night. Connor sat at the bar, watching Finn and Ronan, whom he recognized as locals and frequent visitors to this establishment, trying to meet women. Tasha, sitting next to him, noticed his gaze and asked, "Why are you looking at Finn and Ronan?" Connor turned to her, surprised that she knew their names. "You know them?" he asked. "Absolutely, they come here all the time." "Do you know them personally?" "No, should I?" asked Connor. "I'm not sure where you got that impression, but they work at a warehouse on the outskirts of town, near the highway, so they're locals. Yeah, for many years. They come here to meet women, and they're pretty successful at it," Tasha said. Connor looked at her with a confused expression, but she seemed not to notice. "I didn't think this was a place for hookups. I thought it wasn't a dating spot. We have a good mix, though they usually come in groups, but that doesn't limit these guys to just single women. I think they prefer married women," Tasha said. Connor tried not to show how angry this made him. "That seems risky. I can't imagine husbands being happy about it. I think husbands never find out. These guys don't brag, and I doubt the wives go home and tell their husbands. Sure, there are those cases, but overall, I think it stays a secret. You don't seem against it. I don't see any harm in it. The wife gets a little fun, and the husband doesn't know, so he's not hurt. If she's out with her friends, it means she wasn't planning to be home with him, so he loses nothing. I think those husbands get pretty good sex out of guilt, so they win in the end," Tasha said. Connor thought about her words and realized that nothing could have worked between them if she thought it was okay for other wives. She probably wouldn't have thought twice about doing it herself. It was sad. Tasha kept talking when he didn't respond. "As far as I know, they only did it once with a woman while her husband was in the club. It became a big deal and almost ended in violence, so they don't do it anymore. That night Patrick was off, but it was good that Sean was there. He heard that the wife even asked him to hold her husband so she could leave with the guys." Connor turned to Tasha, and you can only imagine what she saw on his face and in his eyes at that moment. "Yeah, that was us and Siobhan," he said. His tone and expression must have made her realize everything. Her hand flew to her mouth in the gesture women always make when they're surprised. "Oh my God, Connor. That was you and Siobhan, wasn't it? I didn't know. I'd heard that she cheated on you, but I didn't realize it was her." She trailed off, obviously not knowing what else to say. Really, what else could you say? Connor thought. Connor got up from the bar and headed outside, pulling out his mobile phone. He quickly made a call to start the process and then sat down to wait. He hadn't realized the need for revenge until he learned that it had been a lie. Sure, Siobhan agreed to their offer and left with them voluntarily, and that didn't change anything, but he thought she had done it under the impression that they were just guys from out of town looking for luck, and they wouldn't see them again, and that somehow made it better. He found their car in the parking lot, not wanting to perpetuate stereotypes, but when he saw a Cadillac with lowered suspension and ridiculous chrome rims, he was almost certain it was theirs. Since they hadn't started the hunt yet, he was sure he had time before they came out unless they left really early. He didn't know what was happening inside the club, but after almost an hour, they finally came out, pushing a slightly drunk girl in his direction. Yes, he had guessed the car correctly, and he was leaning on the driver's door when they approached. "Hey, dude," said Finn, who was obviously the spokesman for the dynamic duo. "Get your ass off my car." Connor ignored him and focused on the slightly drunk girl they had met inside. However much she deserved what awaited her, he didn't want a woman to suffer, and he was sure her husband didn't deserve it. "Hey, sweetheart, I think you'd better find somewhere else to go, like home with your husband. You know, the guy you promised to forsake all others for." he said to her in a tone that made it clear it wasn't a request. He didn't know what she did after that, but quickly assessing the situation, she decided to follow his advice, and the last thing he saw was her back as she returned to the club despite Finn and Ronan's protests. Once she left, the guys seemed a little pissed off and turned to him with clearly visible intentions. "Why'd you send our girl away, dude? She wasn't yours to send off," said the voice that belonged to Finn, the man Connor had met about 10 months ago. Connor watched as Finn recognized him. "I remember you now. You're the husband of that girl who asked the security guard to hold you so she could be with us. Where is she now? I wouldn't mind another round with her since you sent our girl away. You owe us a replacement," Finn said. Connor felt a chill run down his spine but kept his composure. "Sorry, guys. She's long gone from here," he said. Finn and his friend Ronan exchanged looks, their intentions clear as they began closing in on Connor. "You think you can take the two of us, pretty boy?" Finn asked. Connor held his ground, but he wasn't about to try to take them on alone. Unknown to them, Connor's friends were waiting for his signal. They quickly intervened, subduing Finn and Ronan before they could react. In a matter of moments, the two men were on their knees, their hands tied behind their backs with plastic ties. "Man, we were just having fun. She agreed to it. It's her fault, not ours," Finn pleaded, his bravado evaporating like mist in the sun. Connor felt a surge of anger but suppressed it. He had dealt with the betrayal of his ex-wife, and she was no longer his concern, but men like Finn and Ronan, predators who thought they could lure married women into bed without consequence, were a scourge on society, and Connor intended to make an example of them. "Load them up, boys," Connor ordered, his voice cold and unwavering. His friends loaded the captive men into the back of Jed's pickup truck, chaining them to the sides. They drove for what seemed like an eternity, the city lights fading into the darkness of the night until they reached a secluded forest on the outskirts of the county. Connor played with them, letting fear and uncertainty gnaw at their minds. He spoke about golf tournaments and club leaders, watching their confusion and fear in their eyes. He offered them options, each one more terrifying than the last. Castration, death, or a brutal beating. In the end, Connor's friends persuaded him to show mercy, sparing the men's lives and manhood, but they wouldn't go unpunished. Connor gave them a choice: satisfy each other's desires or face the wrath of 10 angry men. Finn and Ronan exchanged a horrified look, their minds made up. They would take the beating, and under the cover of darkness, Connor and his friends exacted their justice. They struck with precision, avoiding fatal blows but ensuring that the lesson would be remembered. When they finished, they dumped the battered and bruised men on the pavement near the hospital, careful to avoid the watchful eyes of security. The news of the assault spread quickly, but the trail went cold as Finn and Ronan claimed their attackers were strangers, victims of a random robbery gone wrong. They disappeared soon after, their apartments emptied, and their jobs at the warehouse left behind. Connor liked to think they learned their lesson, that they no longer preyed on married women in another town, but sometimes he wondered if he should have gone further, if he should have rid the world of those two predators once and for all. Eventually, Connor had to find a new place to live. Tasha, his former landlady, became increasingly insistent in her advances, and his polite refusals fell on deaf ears. He told her in no uncertain terms that nothing would ever happen between them, not after what she had done with her husband, but that was all in the past. Tonight, Connor was focused on the present, on the beautiful woman who had just walked into the nightclub. Karen, his girlfriend after 4 dates, was finally ready to take their relationship to the next level. And Connor was more than ready to leave the ghosts of his past behind and embrace the future. "Hello, dear Karen," she greeted him, her voice full of promises. "Sorry I'm late. Have you been waiting long?" Connor smiled, his heart swelling with anticipation. "Not tonight, but you've been away too long." Karen's eyes sparkled with mischief as she leaned in to kiss him, her hand sliding over his jeans. "At least one of your waits will end tonight, big boy," she whispered in his ear. "Oh yeah, I'm really looking forward to that." And with that, Connor knew the night was just beginning. The past was behind him, and the future was full of endless possibilities. Connor and Karen spent the evening enjoying each other's company, laughing and talking. They discussed their dreams and plans for the future, and Connor felt like he had finally found someone with whom he could build a new life. Karen was full of energy and optimism, and her presence helped Connor forget the pain of the past. When they left the nightclub, Connor took Karen's hand, and together they headed to his car. Along the way, they continued to talk, and Connor felt a deep connection growing between them. He knew it was just the beginning, but he already felt that Karen could become an important part of his life. At home, Connor and Karen spent the night together, enjoying each other's closeness and warmth. Connor felt like he had finally found peace and happiness, something he had been searching for so long. Karen was by his side, supporting him and sharing her dreams and hopes with him. The next morning, Connor woke up with a sense of renewal and hope. He knew that new opportunities lay ahead of him, and he was ready to embrace them. Karen lay next to him, smiling at him, and Connor realized that he had finally found his place in the world. In the days that followed, Connor and Karen continued to build their relationship, supporting each other and sharing their dreams. Connor felt that his life was finally coming together, and he was ready for new challenges and opportunities. Karen was by his side, helping him move forward. Connor knew that the path to happiness wasn't always easy, but he was ready for any trials that might come his